Right, I wasn't sure what this was going to sound like. Right, doesn't sound too bad. So, welcome. Sorry, I've got my dog sat on my lap right now, in the blooming way. How you doing, Disc? Turn this music down a little bit. Right, so we are here for the Adam and Eve story, the alternative story. I've just changed the title because it was still stuck on the old title. Right, Adam and Eve. The Adam and Eve story by Chan Thomas. This is a declassified, in part sanitized copy approved for release in 2013. The Passions and Perils of Nationhood. For sheer and pervasive fervour, the love of nationhood has no equal among contemporary political passions. Independence is the fetish, fad, and totem of the times. Everybody who can muster a quorum in a colony wants freedom now, and such is the temper of the age that they can usually have it. Roughly 1/3 of the world, some 1 billion people, have run up their own flags in the great dismantlement of empires since World War II, creating 60 new nations over the face of the earth. In the process, they have also created for themselves and for the world a congeries of unstable and uneasy entities that are usually kept alive only by economic aid and stand constantly on the verge of erupting into turmoil. Nationhood is not an easy art to master, as Ghana, Nigeria, and Indonesia have painfully learned in recent weeks. Their troubles are particularly instructive, for most of the world's new nations do not have anything approaching even the modest resources of Ghana, Nigeria, or Indonesia. Most of them are poor, primitive, and ill-equipped for so much as the basics of nationhood. Some have capital cities that are not cities at all. And government ministers who have not learned to administer. Government, in fact, is usually the biggest and sometimes the only industry in many new countries, and corruption is a way of life. Many of the new nations do not have minimal communications and transportation, or enough educated men to fill a new country's needs. In some cases, arbitrary national boundaries cut across ethnic groups mock the rational use of resources and defy any foreseeable hope of achieving distinct national identity. Because it bears the heaviest legacy of colonialism, Africa teems with more new nation afflictions than anywhere else. Because of the problem of nations, that are really not nations by any reasonable standards, is worldwide. Latin America has British Guyana, which wants to go its own way on a shoestring. The Middle East has Yemen. Asia has Laos and its Maldive Islands, neither of which makes much sense as a nation. In a different but equally difficult category is Pakistan, bigger and more populous than the others, but separated in two parts by 1,000 miles of unfriendly land. Heritage and revolution. The problem is going to get worse long before it gets better. More new non-nations are waiting impatiently in the wings. Bechuanaland, Bastuloland, British Guyana, and Mauritius are all due to become independent this year, and Swaziland and South Arabia will follow soon afterward. Britain's Lord Caradon recently reported in the United Nations General Assembly that 50 colonial territories still remained to be freed around the world, 31 in the British Empire alone. Since, in general, the weakest and least viable colonies are the last to be turned loose, the prospect is staggering. All of them, of course, soon apply for membership in the United Nations, where their equal voting power with such big nations as the US and Russia has caused a whole new set of problems. This incongruous situation has moved Secretary General U Thant to suggest that perhaps the UN might want to reconsider its criteria for admission in view of what he tactfully called the recent phenomena, quote, the recent phenomenon of the emergence of exceptionally small new states, end quote. Former UN official and Columbia University Dean Andrew Cordier puts it much more bluntly, quote, the concept of nationhood will be extended to its absurdity, end quote. He says if what he calls the, quote, microstates, end quote, become fully fledged nations. What constitutes a nation? Among political scientists, definitions differ. John Hopkins, Dr. Vernon Mackay, says that, quote, a nation is a group of people who have a feeling of a nationhood based on common historical tradition, common cultural interests, and usually common language, end quote. Rutgers professor Neil MacDonald suggests that the measure of a nation is, quote, its capacity to maintain some kind of autonomy, political and economic, against its environment, end quote. The most sensible test of a nation's viability would seem to be economic sufficiency, the ability to support its people without massive outside aid. Such is not the case nowadays. Many of the statesmen and political scientists believe, in fact, that the whole idea of a viable nation is a 19th century concept that is no longer applicable. Quote, logic and nationalism rarely commingle, end quote, says University of Chicago's William Polk. Quote, nations don't go out of business in the 20th century because of their apparent logical absurdity, end quote. The great post-war proliferation of such international agencies as the UN and the International Development Banks, the competition for loyalties in the Cold War, and above all, the staying power of foreign aid practically ensure survival for any nation that wins independence, however great its problems. Anyone with half a chance gets a whole chance, as evidenced by the nearly $7 billion doled out to the new nations from the industrialized West and $500 million each year from the communist bloc. Furthermore, no one seriously questions the right of peoples to become nations or suggests that they lapse into colonialism. Ever since Woodrow Wilson, self-determination has been the dominant political philosophy of the 20th century. The problem is, though, that the right does not necessarily make might. That right does not necessarily make might. I apologize, reading live, remember. In order to progress beyond mere survival, the new nations need a measure of economic heft and political substance, a chance to make sense in the long run by maturing into nations worthy of the name. Far too many of them raise their flags with little but a flagpole to go on. Considering only their economic demerits, World Bank President George Woods has claimed that 30 of the world's underdeveloped nations are at least, quote, generations, end quote, away from anything resembling self-sustenance. If today's world map looks like a conglomerate glob of silly putty smashed by a hammer and stuck together again, it is because the new nations are in large part, literally and linearly, the heirs of their colonial history. Physically, they are artifacts of the 19th century imperialism's division of the spoils, confined with arbitrary frontiers contrived by colonial map makers. Psychologically, they are the heirs of Europe's own fierce nationalism, which fueled the race for empire. As 19th century British philosopher Walter Bacot observed, political man is a highly imitative animal. The subjugated peoples of the empires resented and rejected colonialism, but they assimilated and accepted much of its trappings, casting about for the same status symbols that their masters had. The deep psychological need to cut the figure of nationhood for all to see is responsible for imposing government palaces, the parliamentary maces, the conspicuous Rolls Royces, the Western-run national airlines, and the gleaming chancelleries that exist in many young nations that can hardly afford to print money of their own. Just pause for a second. Jump in the chat room, say hey. FE Nation, Jolly Man, how you doing, boys? Gen C, how are you? Welcome. I hope the sound quality's all right for you. An exhausting task. The new nations are created so quickly and usually with such a lack of rational preparation that they spawn problems never faced by most of the older countries, which evolved their own nationhoods over centuries. The empire builders, for example, never were lashed by the obligation to improve the standards of living of those they ruled. Today, the leaders of a new nation are soon in trouble if they do not do so, visibly and dramatically. They confront not one, but several revolutions at once: political, economic, social, technological, and are thereby called on to make choices that Western statesmen never had to make. The evidence of how difficult those choices are, and of how unprepared the new nations are to make them, is everywhere at hand. Simply getting a country in business at all can be a formidable task. Mauritania, for example, is practically a movable, interesting. Right, okay, so this is a declassified and sanitized copy approved for release, and that just stops there. The person that scanned this book in hasn't taken too much care. I'll show you. You can see it's not. It's the end of that. Simply getting a country in business at all can be a formidable task. Mauritania, for example, is practically a movable. So, Spain, the nuke fluke. Britain held off any announcement, waiting for Spain to make the first statement. Spain held off, nervously uncertain of what to say. Finally, last week, some 44 days after the event, the two countries officially announced that the whole world had been discussing for the past 6 weeks that the US bomb had indeed misplaced one H-bomb. The US had indeed misplaced one H-bomb. The nuke was one of 4 that fell over southern Spain on January 17th, when a US Air Force B-52 collided with a refueling tanker. First 3 bombs and 4 crew members were quickly recovered. The 4th bomb was still missing. Although the bombs were armed and protected by radiation-proof shields, the US was understandably anxious to get them all back. To that end, 700 US airmen, soldiers, civilian technicians, and Spanish troops were scouring a 10 square mile coastline, or coastal area near Palomares, and 16 ships, including 3 deep-sea subs, were combing the ocean floor. All they turned up were 200 chunks of metal ranging from one of the aircraft's latrines to an old man-of-war cannonball. In Madrid and Washington, the two governments revealed that only one of the 3 recovered bombs had actually survived the fall intact. Some of the TNT detonators on the other 2 had exploded on impact and ruptured the shell casing, permitting some radioactive plutonium and uranium to scatter over 18 acres in the impact area. However, there was no cause for alarm. Spain's Nuclear Energy Board quickly assured of the 2,000 potentially exposed people in the area, 1,800 had been examined thus far, and none had received a dangerous dose. What is more, added the board, there is not the slightest risk in eating meat, fish, vegetables from the zone, or drinking milk from there. Just to be on the safe side, the US dug up 1,500 cubic yards of contaminated topsoil and tomato plants and made plans to ship them back to the radioactive waste dump in Aiken, South Carolina. Is that? SC? I don't know. For diplomatic burial. For diplomatic burial. What? So they're taking the tomatoes back and giving them a funeral. The tomatoes in the soil, they give the topsoil tomato plants, and they gave them all a funeral, diplomatic burial. They had the flag out and everything, 10-gun salute. As for the bomb that was still missing, the researchers seemed prepared to continue the hunt indefinitely. Was there a chance its radioactive contents were leaking into Spain's coastal waters? With Spain's big tourist season about to begin, it was a horrifying thought. US Ambassador Angier Biddle Duke's duty was clear: to prove the safety of Spanish shores. He made a date with Spain's Information and Tourism Minister to take a chilly 59-degree Fahrenheit Mediterranean dip this week with their wives and children in the water of the Palomares. I don't know if this is this is all an essay, isn't it? So this is a bit like a newspaper article. But what have we learned over the last 3 years? We've learned over the last 3 years that the last people that you can trust is the government. The last people that you can trust is the medical industry. They're the last people to trust when official statements are put out, because they've been proven time and time again that they lie. They lie. Whether they do that for good reasons or for bad reasons, it doesn't matter. They lie. They don't give us the truth. They think that they don't think anyone's intelligent enough to be able to handle the truth or to be able to discern it for themselves. The reality of the whole nuclear thing might be completely different to what they're telling everybody. I'll refer everybody again to Chernobyl. What does Chernobyl look like now? I've watched lots of urban explorer videos, guys going out there with Geiger counters, radioactive, sensors and whatever, just to make sure that they're not putting themselves in danger. Even though we assume that those clicks mean if it's going mad with the old Geiger counter, that means it's dangerous. It doesn't. That's what they tell us. That is what they tell us. However, I'm not sure if I'd want to put that to the test. I like that. Jimmy Savile's mate is not my king, I'll tell you that much. How you doing, Sergeant Bum Bum? And Kerry Lorbs, multi-dimensional. Great voice, thank you. I feel, yeah. I always feel weird with compliments. Anyway, where did we get to? Great Britain. We're on our way, brothers. It was a scene that could happen only in the House of Commons. There on the front row sprawled the Prime Minister, his feet propped on the table beside the dispatch box, where his Chancellor of the Exchequer droned on sonorously about Britain's finances. From the jammed benches on both sides of the chamber came a cacophony of hoots and jeers, and it got louder and louder as James Callaghan spelled out the political damage that he and Harold Wilson had designed to please the public. First, he promised that there would be no major tax increases for the average wage earner. On the Tory benches, the jeering grew louder. Next, Callaghan announced a tax on upper-class forms of gambling, horses and casinos, which he explained brightly would be used to reduce the cost of mortgages for low-income house owners. Something different. Then came the biggest surprise. Britain, said Callaghan, would switch from the traditional pounds, shilling and pence to decimal currency in 1971. By now the Tories were in full cry. An uproarious farce, shouted Conservative leader Ted Heath. Quote, the government is bereft of ideas and fuddy-duddy. End quote. Wilson buried his head in mock despair and nearly fell off the bench laughing. Above the roar, Economics Minister George Brown could be heard shouting, quote, we're on our way, brothers, we're on our way, end quote. Indeed they were. Only the day before, the Prime Minister had done what his party had hoped he would, capitalising on the average Briton's unparalleled prosperity and Labour's soaring popularity. He called a general election for March 31st. The Gallup poll forecast that Wilson would win a 165-seat majority in the 630-seat House. London bookies made Labour a 6-1 favourite. Of course, a landslide victory had also been forecast for Harold Wilson's Labourites 17 months ago. Instead, they barely broke 13 years of Tory rule, taking office with only a 5-seat majority, a margin that now stands at a mere 3. In that election, Wilson's fortunes had not been helped by his reputation as the voice of Labour's left and as a scheming opportunist. Labour's current confidence is largely the result of Wilson's emergence as something far different. Defending the pound. In office, Wilson has proved to be a man of the middle, and that is where the votes are in today's affluent Britain. To be sure, Wilson's government has raised pensions, liberalised the National Health Service insurance scheme, and instituted long-range national economic planning. But the steel industry has not been nationalised. He has kicked the unions far harder than any Conservative would have dared, castigating Britain's raise-happy workers for sheer damn laziness. And he has dared to end the pound with the simple, old-fashioned remedy of deflating demand at home. Defying his own anti-war left wing, Wilson has consistently, often brilliantly, defended the US position in Vietnam, refusing to be frightened into precipitate action on Rhodesia. He hopes that economic sanctions ultimately will resolve the rebellion without bloodshed. As never before, Britons are expected to vote more for the National Party leader and less for the local MP. If they do this, Labour may indeed be a shoo-in. Since last July's bitter fight for leadership, Heath has failed either to unite the Tories or capture the imagination of the British electorate. On some social issues, he has moved to the right, not exactly a vote-getting position. Wilson, by contrast, has become the very model of a middle-ground politician. Homely accent, rumpled and witty. Still, he refuses to be overly optimistic about the election. How big a majority did he seek? Asked the television interviewer. Quote, just more than 3, end quote, replied Wilson earnestly. Like they've done it again. It's just snips. Look, we've gone to talking about Moorish nomads. So this book, right, actually starts here. I don't know what I've been reading here. The essay. How strange. How strange. Right, make a note. Make a note. Story doesn't actually start until 31 minutes into the stream. Sorry about that. I do apologise. And let me put a chat. Actually, let me make the chat visible. There we go. To Wayo. Without her help, through the years of sleepless nights and seemingly endless trials of study and translation, this book would have come into being. Contents: the next cataclysm, the great floods, the story, the event, Genesis, conclusion. The next cataclysm. Hang on. Do you want to be able to see it while I'm reading it? Do you like having the PDF up here and you can read it with me? Or would you rather have the picture of Adam and Eve? How many kiddie fiddlers does it take to screw in a light bulb? Answer: most of Parliament. Just JP, how you doing? Brian Evans, one love, my friend. And India, how are you doing, babe? Good to see you. I can't say no. No, welcome, no. Right. I'm going to continue. Like Noah's 6,500 years ago, like Adam and Eve's 11,500 years ago, this too will come to pass. With a rumble so low as to be inaudible, growing, throbbing, then fuming into a thunderous roar, the earthquake starts. Only it's not like any earthquake in recorded history. In California, the mountains shake like ferns in a breeze. The mighty Pacific rears back and piles up into a mountain of water more than 2 miles high, then starts its race eastward. With the force of 1,000 armies, the wind attacks, ripping, shredding everything in supersonic bombardment. The unbelievable mountain of the Pacific sea water follows the wind eastward, burying Los Angeles and San Francisco as if they were but grains of sand. Nothing, but nothing, stops the relentless, overwhelming onslaught of wind and ocean. Across the continent, the 1,000-mile-per-hour wind wreaks its unholy vengeance everywhere, mercilessly, unceasingly. Every living thing is ripped into shreds while being blown across the countryside, and the earthquake leaves no place untouched. In many places, the Earth's molten sublayer breaks through and spreads a sea of white-hot liquid fire to add to the Holocaust. Within 3 hours, the fantastic wall of water moves across the continent, burying the wind-ravaged land under 2 miles of seething water coast to coast. In a fraction of a day, all vestiges of civilization are gone. And the great cities, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Chicago, Dallas, New York, are nothing but legends. Barely a stone is left where millions walked just a few hours before. A few lucky ones who managed to find shelter from the screaming wind on the lee side of Pikes Peak watched the sea of molten fire break through the quaking valleys below. The raging waters follow, piling higher and higher, steaming over the molten earth fire and rising almost to their feet. Only great mountains such as this one can withstand the cataclysmic onslaught. America is not alone in her death throes. Central America suffers the same cannonade, wind, earth fire, and inundation. South America finds the Andes not high enough to stop the cataclysmic violence, pounded out by nature in her berserk rage. In less than a day, Ecuador, Peru, and western Brazil are shaken madly by the devastating earthquake. Burned by molten earth fire, buried under cubic meters of torrential Pacific seas, and then turned into frozen hell. Everything freezes. Man, beast, plant, and mud are all rock hard in less than 4 hours. Europe cannot escape the onslaught. The raging Atlantic piles higher and higher upon itself, following the screeching wind eastward. The Alps, the Pyrenees, the Urals, and Scandinavian mountains are shaken and heaved even higher before the wall of water strikes. Western Africa and the sands of the Sahara vanish in nature's wrath under savage attack by wind and ocean. The area bounded by the Congo, South Africa, and Kenya suffers only severe earthquakes and wind. No inundation. Survivors there marvel at the sun, standing still in the sky for nearly half a day. Eastern Siberia and the Orient suffer a strange fate indeed. As though a giant subterranean scythe sweeps away the Earth's foundations, accompanied by the wind, in its screaming symphony of supersonic death and destruction. As the Arctic basin leaves its polar home, Eastern Siberia, Manchuria, China, and Burma are subjected to the same annihilation as South America. Wind, earth fire, inundation, and freezing. Jungle animals are shredded to ribbons by the wind, piled up into mountains of flesh and bone, and buried under avalanches of seawater and mud. Then comes the terrible paralyzing cold. Not man, nor beast, nor plant, nor earth is left unfrozen in the entire Eastern Asian continent, most of which remains below sea level. East of the Urals, in western Siberia, a few lucky people survive the fantastic winds and quakes. Antarctica and Greenland, with their ice caps, now rotate around the Earth in the torrid zone, and the fury of wind and inundation marches on for 6 days and nights. During the 6th day, the ocean starts to settle in their new homes, running off the high grounds. On the 7th day, the horrendous rampage is over. The Arctic ice age is ended, and a new Stone Age begins. The oceans, the great homogenizers, have laid down another deep layer of mud over the existing strata in the Great Plains and exposed the Grand Canyon, painted desert, and badlands. The Bay of Bengal Basin, just east of India, is now at the North Pole. The Pacific Ocean, just west of Peru, is at the South Pole. Greenland and Antarctica, now rotating equatorially in the torrid zone, find their ice caps dissolving madly in the tropical heat. Massive walls of water and ice surge towards the oceans, taking everything from mountains to plains in gushing, heaving paths, creating immense seasonal moraines. In less than 25 years, the ice caps are gone, and the oceans around the world rise over 200 feet with the newfound water. The torrid zone will be shrouded in a fog for generations from the enormous amounts of moisture poured into the atmosphere by the melting ice caps. New ice caps begin to form in the new polar areas. Greenland and Antarctica emerge with verdant, tropical foliage. Australia is the new unexplored continent in the North Temperate Zone, with only a few handfuls of survivors populating its vastness. New York lies at the bottom of the Atlantic, shattered, melted by earth fire, and covered by unbelievable amounts of mud. Of San Francisco and Los Angeles, not a trace is left. Egypt emerges from its Mediterranean inundation new and higher, still the land of the ages. The commonplace of our time becomes the mysterious Baalbek of the new era. A new era. Yes, the cataclysm has done its work well. The great population regulator of all does once more for man what he refuses to do for himself, and drives the pitiful few who survive into a new Stone Age. Once more, the Earth has shifted its 60-mile thick shell, with the poles moving almost to the equator in a fraction of a day. Again, the atmosphere and oceans refusing to change direction, with the Earth's shell having wiped out almost all of life. After this tumble, we join Noah, Adam, and Eve, Atlantis, Mu, and Olympus, and Jesus joins Osiris, Ta'aroa, Zeus, and Vishnu. The Great Floods. The Great Floods. Noah, Adam and Eve, Vishnu, Osiris, what do they have in common? They represent eras ages apart, and yet somehow they all join hands in the next cataclysm and walk with us. There are others who walk with us too, men of science, long forgotten, those who first saw that these tumbles, these cataclysmic catastrophes or revolutions of the Earth's shell have happened before, countless times. J. André de Luc in 1779 and Georges Cuvier in 1812 were the foremost. Dolomieu, the famous mineralogist, joined the consensus, as did Escher and Farrell, the Swiss geologists, and also J. André de Luc Jr. and von Buch. They all agreed that the cataclysms were caused by sudden revolutions of the surface of the Earth. Cuvier, in his Theory of the Earth, first published in 1812, based his conclusions on his unparalleled correlative research in stratigraphy, comparative anatomy, and paleontology. At that time, he wrote, quote, "Every part of the Earth, every hemisphere, every continent exhibits the same phenomenon. There has, therefore, been a succession of variations in the economy of organic nature. The various catastrophes which have disturbed the strata have given rise to numerous shiftings of this continental basin. It is of much importance to mark that these repeated interruptions and retreats of the sea have never been slow nor gradual. On the contrary, most of the catastrophes which occasioned them have been sudden. This is especially easy to prove with regard to the last of these catastrophes. I agree, therefore, with M.M. de Luc and Dolomieu in thinking that if anything in geology has been established, it is that the surface of our globe has undergone a great and sudden revolution, the date of which cannot be much earlier than 5,000 or 6,000 years ago. Also, one preceding revolution at least had put the continents under water, perhaps 2 or 3 eruptions of the sea. These alternations now appear to me to form the problem in geology that it is of most importance to solve. In order to solve it satisfactorily, it would be necessary to discover the cause of these events. These ideas have haunted, I may almost say, have tormented me during my researches among fossil bones, researches which embrace but a very small part of these phenomena of the age preceding the last general revolution of the globe, and which are yet intimately connected with all the others. I just got to pause it. I just got to pause my reading of this book to say, the reason anything haunted you or tormented you, my friend, is because your globe model is a big old load of poop. So, there you go. How you doing, little wing? Good to see you. Many attempts have been made to answer the charge made to the geological profession by Cuvier to explain these sudden revolutions. Among others, Velikovsky tried it through his study of myths and legends. Hapgood tried it. Brown attempted, and in the process amassed a tremendous library of geological data. Every time the cataclysmic cosmic concept has come to life, the beast has been stoned, burned at the stake, beaten to a pulp, and buried with a vengeance. But the corpse simply won't stay dead. Each time it raises the lid of its coffin and says in sepulchral tones, "You will die before I." The latest of the challengers is Professor Frank C. Hibben, who in his book, The Lost Americas, said, quote, "This is no ordinary extinction of a vague geological period which fizzled to an uncertain end. This death was catastrophic and all-inclusive. What caused the death of 40 million animals? The corpus delicti in this mystery may be found almost anywhere. Their bones lie bleaching in the sands of Florida and in the gravels of New Jersey. They weather out of the dry terraces of Texas and protrude from the sticky ooze of the tar pits off Wilshire Boulevard in Los Angeles. The bodies of the victims are everywhere. We find literally thousands together, young and old, foal with dam, calf with cow. The muck pits of Alaska are filled with evidence of universal death, a picture of quick extinction. Any argument as to the cause must apply to North America, Siberia, and Europe as well. Mammoth and bison were torn and twisted as though by a cosmic hand in a godly rage. In many places, the Alaskan muck blanket is packed with animal bones and debris in trainload lots. Mammoth, mastodon, bison, horses, wolves, bears, and lions, a faunal population in the middle of some cataclysmic catastrophe, was suddenly frozen in a grim charade. End quote. Fantastic winds, volcanic burning, inundation and burial in muck, preservation by deep freeze. Quote, any good solution to a consuming mystery must answer all of the facts. End quote. Challenges Hibben. The challenge wouldn't leave me alone. Like a hunger, it gnawed at my subconscious. I could hear the deep tones of Cuvier's challenge. Quote, find the cause of these events, end quote, still reverberating through the sacred halls of science, ghostly, unanswered. I felt Hibben's challenge later on, prodding, answer all of the facts. I decided that this cataclysmic concept, this catastrophic end, which seemed to visit our planet time after time, needed verification or refutation once and for all. The first step was to gather all of the known accepted data from as many Earth sciences as possible. Stratigraphic, Stratigraphy, archaeology, anthropology, paleontology, radiology, oceanography, seismology, glaciology, and many other fields. Correlation of the data between the sciences gave the answer. Although there is enough data in each science to indicate that these cataclysms happen, there was not enough to prove the concept. But between science correlation showed indeed that the concept was true. Not only did it verify that the events have happened, but disclosed when the last 5 cataclysms were and what positions of the shell of the Earth have been in for the last 35,000 years. So after years of research, beginning in 1949, Cuvier's challenge had an answer. Yes, indeed, the cataclysms do happen. And the last one, 6,500 years ago, was Noah's flood. All right, so they happen. What is it that happens each time? The challenge was really twofold. Find the process. What happens in a cataclysm? And the trigger. What causes a cataclysm to start? What a chase. And what a dramatic story of Earth's history we uncovered. Civilizations of 20,000 years ago, more advanced than our wildest imagination. Prehistoric legends from Greece, India, Egypt, South America, which became history instead of legend. Lost continents in the Atlantic and Pacific, which became dated realities, with logical reasons for their sudden disappearance. Yes, Vishnu came alive. A man who lived through a cataclysm 70,000 years before our time, actually 10 cataclysms ago. Now he is known as the Hindu god of 10 resurrections from the water. Osiris, too, was rediscovered. He was the Jesus of his time, a man of Egypt, some 15,000 years ago. Noah smiled at us from the pages of the Epic of Gilgamesh. He actually was a Sumerian named Utnapishtim, who lived 6,500 years ago. The ark he built is more than legend. The process of a cataclysm is known now. Look at the cross-section of the Earth inside the front cover. You will see 2 molten layers, the orange ones. The important one is the thin molten layer about 60 miles thick, which is between 60 and 120 miles down below the surface of the Earth. The thick, deep molten layer starting 1,800 miles down at the bottom of the mantle and extending 1,300 miles deeper is the outer core. Pause it again. Let's just pause this little reading of this again, because it is actually quoting documented facts. Like this is what they reckon, and they've never even dug deeper than 7.5 miles. So let's just remember that, shall we? While we're quoting facts and figures, that they've never actually dug deeper than 7.5 miles. So how are they telling us what's 4,000 miles? Not 4,000. 1,300 miles. 80, yeah, it is. Look, 3,100 miles. How can they tell us what's 3,100 miles under the... How can they even tell us that there is a 3,100 miles? How can they tell us that the Earth goes 3,100 miles deep when they've never dug deeper than 7.5 miles? Just something to think about. Now, both molten layers are liquid. Oh, God, sorry, I should just read this. Now both molten layers are liquid. However, the inner magnetic and electrical structure of the Earth, which is apparently stopped and is now going to start turning the other way. I'm not sure how they're measuring that, but yeah. However, the inner magnetic and electrical structure of the Earth make these layers act as if they were near solid or plastic. As long as the magnetic and electrical structure maintains its orderliness, this old Earth keeps on rotating on its axis in a normal manner. The reason I've got such a fucking issue with this. And anytime anybody starts quoting any of this crap about a fucking globe Earth and how thick it is and how thick that, and that there's a mantle and there's a core and all of this bullshit, they've never dug deeper than 7.5 miles. They can't prove anything. All of this is theory. But people talk about it as if it's fact, and they have been for the last 100 years. These supposedly learned men, these supposedly intelligent learned men who are absolutely incapable of thinking critically for themselves. It just makes me fucking sick. Makes me absolutely sick that these dickheads think that they're intelligent. They're unable to think critically about anything. All they can do is regurgitate what they've been told by their masters. It applies 100 years ago as it applies today. The growing ice caps, Antarctica and Greenland, are not centered on the Earth's axis. And because they rotate around the poles, are trying to swing down to the equator. The only way they could do it would be to pull the whole 65-mile thick shell around with them. As long as the shallow molten layer stays plastic, the shell won't shift. But every few thousand years, the magnetic and electrical orderliness inside the Earth is disrupted, and the molten layer is allowed to act like a free liquid, which it was all the time anyway. And then I'm going to start reading this as if I'm a fucking child. And then then serves as a lubricant for the ice cap to pull the shell of the Earth around the inside. In a quarter to half a day, the poles move almost to the equator and all hell lets loose. The atmosphere and oceans don't shift with the shell. They just keep on rotating west to east. And as the equator, that speed is 1,000, and at the equator, that speed is 1,000 miles an hour. I'm not going to be able to read this book seriously. I'm sorry, I'm just going to tell you now. If you're expecting me to read this seriously now, I can't now. I can't anymore. Because this is absolute fucking la-la land. That you cannot be in more imagination land than you are when you're thinking about this. It's not based on any fact at all. Exactly. The person that wrote this has probably got a really high IQ. They went to Harvard and Oxford and they studied for years. How dare you tell me that I'm not intelligent? Are you some sort of fool? Did you not go to school? Did you not learn that the Earth is a globe? Yes, we know, definitely. How did you find the depth of the Earth? Did you send a probe down? Well, no, we couldn't send a probe down. Unfortunately, we couldn't get any deeper than 7.5 miles. But it's our estimation that the crust is, definitely at least a couple of 100 miles thick, and then we've got another 1,000 or so miles. And basically, because we've determined that the Earth is approximately 25,000 miles in circumference, it means that the diameter, the radius, are calculable. But it does not mean that the curvature is calculable, even though it does actually say that it's calculable because of the parameters that we've already set. That that it's 25,000 miles in circumference. And it's a globe. It's a perfect globe, in fact. Absolutely perfect circular globe, just like a beach ball. But just because of that does not mean that you'll be able to witness the curvature. It won't be measurable anywhere on Earth, defying physical, defying physics, basically. But it's just the way it is. Jennifer Flores, how you doing? It has to be normally to make one rotation per day, because that's what they told us in school. That's what I learned. So when the shell shifts with the poles going toward the equator, the winds and oceans go eastward, blowing across the face of the Earth with supersonic speeds, inundating continents with water miles deep, because it just makes sense that that's what happens, okay? It's all traveling at 1,000 miles an hour, for God's sake. Can't you feel it? Now, what about the trigger? Well, the trigger is that you actually mentioned the globe. This turned out to be the most elusive piece of the whole puzzle. We couldn't rely on some supernatural explanation, like sometimes happens in the heavens, of a vague character which actually violated the laws of nature. No, it had to be something natural, a part of nature's ordinary structure, which disrupts the Earth's inner electrical and magnetic structure whenever it happens. We once thought that the sunspots could be the cause, because we know exactly what the sun's made of, because we sent a rocket up there. My friend Steve got out and took a sample. We could see that it's obviously clear what it's made of, and that it's there. 1.3 million miles away. Because they do disrupt the Earth's inner electrical and magnetic structure. But we were wrong. We found out that nature's power plant is a motor generator system existing in many different magnitudes. It's a basic structure of the universe. The energy structure of an atom is identical to a rotating planet, because they told us that in school, and that's what the pictures show. It's very clear. To a blue-white star, to a galaxy, to a supergalaxy, to all levels of supergalaxies, including a universe, and even more. As a neutron, which has escaped from its parent atom's neutral zone, will separate into particles. A star, through a sunspot, gives off neutral matter which explodes as it becomes energized. So a galaxy gives birth to an exploding star when a dead star escapes from its neutral zone in the center. And as a dead galaxy explodes, when it escapes from the central neutral zone of its parent supergalaxy, a planet, therefore, must act the same as its energy level. So apparently, once every few thousand years, neutral matter escapes from the 860-mile radius inner core into the 1,300-mile thick molten outer core, and there is a literal atomic explosion inside the Earth. Because we've watched it and we've measured it, and we had gents down there, and they actually witnessed it. And they know it happened because we've seen it. This is not theory, okay? This is not theory. The explosion in the high energy layer of the outer core disrupts completely the electrical and magnetic structure in both the molten outer core and the outer 60-mile thick molten layer. Finally, the ice caps are allowed to pull the shell of the Earth around the interior, with the shallow molten layer lubricating the shift all the way. Yet to get a bit of lubrication in there, didn't you? Lubrication's extremely important. Don't know where I'd be without my KY. You can see then that ice ages are not a matter of advancing and retreating ice. It is simply that different areas of the Earth are in polar regions at different times, for different durations of time. with the changes between positions taking place in a fraction of a day. The story around the world gives us silent testimony. The Berezovka mammoth, frozen in mud with buttercups in its mouth. The age of the gorges below Niagara Falls, and St. Anthony's Falls, both about 6,500 years. The sudden end of the Laurentian Basin ice cap in Canada about 11,500 years ago. The uninterrupted years of evolution of the Galapagos over 11,000. The geological datings in the Murrumbidgee River Basin system in Australia, showing the end of an ice cap there about 11,500 years ago. The age of fossil bones taken from the Wilshire Boulevard tar pits over 11,000 years. The sudden end of all work in the prehistoric city of Tiahuanaco, Peru, 9,550 years before Christ, or 11,500 years ago. Leonard Woolley's great work in the Holy Land, dating Noah's flood at about 6,000 years ago. The end of the Wisconsin ice cap about 29,000 years ago. The sudden 200-foot rise of the oceans all over the world, 6,000 to 7,000 years ago. The sudden rise of the St. Lawrence riverbed, 6,500 years ago. The changing levels of the shoreline in the Hudson Bay, the granite blocks from the Alps sitting on the eastern slopes of the Jura Mountains at 4,000 feet above sea level. The great legendarian Fraser's uncovering of over 8,000 separate inundation survival legends in the Malay Peninsula region. The Pejac Marsh in Australia, which shows a quick extinction of a civilization 11,500 years ago. Piri Reis map showing the North Pole in the Sudan Basin. The Egyptian water clock showing agreement with the Piri Reis map. Granite on top of the mountains around Death Valley in California. The great stratifactions of the Grand Canyon, Painted Desert, and Badlands, each layer homogeneous, showing it to be deposited there suddenly by fantastic amounts of water. The commutable age of the Antarctic and Greenland ice caps, about 6,500 years ago. The present growth of the Antarctic ice cap, about 293 cubic miles per year. The legend from the primitive man in Tierra del Fuego, the southern tip of South America, of the day of the sun, of the day the sun set in the wrong direction. The legends from primitive man in Peru of the day the sun stood still. The legends from the Malayan and Sumatran Aborigines of the long night. The Vav, earth strata, counts in Renshaw, Minnesota, Hackensack, New Jersey, which agree. The prevalence of jade in the Orient, which is a material upheaval, a material heaved up from the mantle near equatorial pivot points during a tumble. The fantastic evidence of a burgeoning tropical population in Arctic Siberia and Alaska, completely wiped out in a fraction of a day. The similarity of languages the world over, from Polynesian to Greek to Egyptian to Mayan to Eskimo to Yakut to Oriental and more. The correlation of ice ages and quick extinctions the world over. The survival of primitive life at equatorial pivot points, the last two being the Malay Peninsula and the Galapagos, now rife with lizards. The extinction of a coral reef on the floor of the Arctic Ocean, and more and more and more and more give us a historical picture of the Earth's shell during the past 3,500 years. You know, one of the reasons why I just think that absolutely anything that anybody that's supposedly intellectual or intelligent has ever said needs to be really questioned. Massively questioned. Critical thinking has to go into it. And we have to basically address all of these things that they looked at, chuck their conclusions out of the window and draw our own. It's because all of these people that are so-called learned, intellectual, really smart people all went along with the bullshit for the last 3 years because they believed what they were told. All of these university degree, doctorates, fucking PhDs, everybody that went to university basically, and further higher education, who'd been fully indoctrinated, went along fully with what was being told to us. And we're supposed to trust that they used their discernment and critical thought. What the last 3 years has proven is that not one of those people was able to think critically for themselves. Not one of those people showed any ounce of smarts. All they showed was the ability to follow instruction. And these are the so-called learned people that we're learning everything from. So basically, we've just spent our entire lives looking up to and learning from automatons who have been programmed with that information that they've been imparting on the rest of us. The overwhelming evidence when put in order, gives a dramatic picture of which areas have been at the North Pole, when they moved to the North Pole, and how long they were there. Yes, Noah, Adam and Eve, Osiris, Ta'aroa, Zeus and Vishnu have deeper meanings now. And as they join hands and with us, we hear Adam and Eve saying, "Listen, for now we can truly share our story with you." Bullshit! Sorry. The story, enigma, pursuit, unraveling. It's funny how some things can plague you from childhood through your adult years. Not big things, but little things which don't exactly persist, but annoyingly stick in their head through your life's jaw and say, "Boo!" Just to let you know that they're still there. If I made a list of all these things in my life, it might end up a whole book. That's what happens when you're indoctrinated with bullshit. Just like to say, that's what happens when you're taught lies. The lies don't sit true, and so your entire life, the question's always there because it never got answered truthfully. I'd like to talk about just one of these bugaboos. From the first time I heard the story of creation and Adam and Eve, it buzzed me, as my young son would say. Now, to me, the answer was not simply one of two usual alternatives, either unquestioning faith in the story as it stands or complete repudiation as utter nonsense. No, the answer seemed to lie elsewhere. If the story were taught as the truth so uniformly, in spite of its apparent divergence from scientific truths, then to me this true course would seem to be a search for the foundation of the story, which would then lead to a true reading of it. So we'll just say, this guy is looking for the truth. He's searching for the truth because his nose has been taught lies. But the trouble is, he's still doing it upon a foundation of lies. He's accepting, well, this is everything. All of these things that they've told me have been true, absolutely true. But all of these things are a bit questionable. I think they're lying about this, but they're not lying about this. No, they wouldn't lie about this, but they're lying about this. And there we arrive back at the boy who cried wolf. The whole reason, pathological compulsive liars can never be trusted. The pursuit happened almost by accident. Years of data correlating in studying the Earth, tumbling concept. Years of data correlation in studying the Earth tumbling concept has shown the last tumble to have occurred about 65,000 years ago. But that, unfortunately, that date is a load of bloody bullshit because it's based on carbon dating that cannot be relied upon to be accurate. So that's a load of, and Jason has shown through his chronology that the last flood was not 6,500 years ago. So I'm not the best person to read this book, man. I just got to say, I'm not the best person to read this book. I can't. It's all based. His entire concept is based upon believing that what science has told him is true. Thinking that we're living on a fucking globe that's spinning at 1,000 miles an hour, hurtling through space. The whole reset thing is, yeah, absolutely. But yeah, I don't think I can read it. I could put the link. I'll put the link. Well, no, you can do what I did. If you want to read this book, just search for it. It's you'll find the PDF online. It's not hard to find. I don't think I can put a link to it. Isness, how you doing? Let's turn that off for a sec. Yeah, it's a sanitized copy of one thing. Yeah, Jennifer, absolutely right. It's a sanitized, edited, approved for release copy. It's come from the CIA. So, and declassified in part. It's like I put a short up. I don't know, an hour ago or something. I put a short. Tim Pool, Think Critically. Tim was talking last night about the Ebola outbreak, and he's going into all this what they think are facts and reports, and people run, whatever it was that they reported. Who was it that reported it? It was the same people that reported for the last 3 years. People just don't. People don't get it, even though they see that the press has been lying to us for the last 3 years. That social media is completely hijacked, has intelligence agents working in all aspects of it, who are ensuring that the truth is not getting publicized. The real story is not getting publicized. So that's been going on for the last 3 years, and people like Tim Pool seem to think that it's only been going on for the what? Do you think it only started happening in 2015, or in the year 2000, or in the year 1969? Or no, it's the whole time we have been here. Our entire lives has been a very carefully constructed fairy tale. Thank you very much, Holistic Media. Thank you, babe. I've only got it saved on my hard drive, and I don't want to. I don't know if I can share. I'm not going to share off of my hard drive. After other people went and downloaded their own from that. Thank you very much for doing that, India. You're awesome. So, yeah, I just through absolute necessity. I can't see any other way of finding out what's going on other than to throw everything that I've ever been taught or that has ever been pushed down our throats, ever been told by the media, ever been published in books or papers since the, for the last 120 years. Just cannot believe any of it. Just have to take it all on board, but not actually buy any of it. Not don't allow it to take root or take hold. Kerry Lorbs. I can keep reading it. If enough of you guys want me to keep reading it, I'll keep reading it. But I'm not going to be able to do it without just keep putting my 2 cents in, and it's just going to get very annoying for you and for me. I want to be able to take it seriously. I really want to be able to take this seriously, and I can't. It's completely rooted in fairy tale. What time is it? It's 1:30. So I got a busy day today. Because I want to do a live music. I want to have a little sing song. Um, because it's a good way to just chill out, man. Just singing to people. So I want to do that, and also at 6 o'clock, I'm doing a live with Joe Gifford in Australia, and I don't know what we're going to talk about. It's going to be an organic conversation, as always, and yeah, we'll see where that. Like I say, we've got um, got no idea what we're going to talk about really, but I'm going to change. I'm going to have to change from Restream to StreamYard to do the music because Restream isn't working with playing the music as well. So maybe I'll start a half hour early. Oh, sorry, an hour earlier than I was going. I was going to start at 3 o'clock with the music, but maybe I'll start at 2. You're a singer songwriter too, Kerry Lorbs. Really? Have you got anything on your channel? Anything can go and have a listen to? I like hearing real people you know, not music industry, pop stars. I like listening to real. If you're a songwriter, I'm more of a music writer than a songwriter. I do write songs. I have written songs, but lyrics are, I have to channel the lyrics. Um, so yeah, I'm going to wrap this one up, right? And I'm going to be back in about half an hour with some live music. I'll do some live music for a couple of hours, and then I'll have time to have a little break before the live stream with Joe at 6 o'clock. So thank you very much to everybody that's here. Sorry about the reading not going the way I wanted to take this book seriously, right? Yeah. Hey, how you doing, man? Bernie, good to see you, mate. And I was watching the live stream earlier with Zertus. That was cool, and all the other guys that you had on there. And yeah, Bernie, I'm sorry, mate. I've started covering this, but you know how I feel about certain claims about how this earth has been made and stuff, and when I just I got too triggered. I got too triggered reading this. 6 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time is when I'm speaking to Joe. Yes. You're in Montana. Cool. Did you say you have an old channel with some originals? Can you put a link? Can you give us a link to it, Kerry Lorbs? If you could give us a link to that, that would be awesome. And Bernie, I'm going to be back in about half an hour. I'll get the old guitar out and have a little sing song. The link is in the chat for anybody that wants a link to this Adam and Eve story, declassified in part, sanitized copy approved for release. I'd actually like to see the one that's not sanitized and that's not approved for release. I would read that, even though I want to see what they've sanitized. I want to see what they've taken out. But anyway, on that note, I'll be back in about half an hour. Thank you very much for being here. Love you all.